Can we trust democracy to work? I've been struggling with how things have worked out in this year, 2022. The decisions made by this Supreme Court have taken us way back. Experts say this court is the most conservative since 1931. And it feels like we've been forced back to that time, with all the progress made in the last 50 years being wiped away. And I'm not okay.
Apparently
In
so.
addition to state legislators, including our own, have found ways to continue to follow a detrimental path, despite the fact that the general population has become more progressive. How do these things happen in a democracy? Can we trust our democracy to work? As Unitarian Universalists, we live up democracy. So much so,
No, I just held
currently
whatever
spelled
you want.
out in one of our principles.
Just
Our fifth principle states
yourself.
that we covenant to affirm and promote the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. Now, you use promotion of the right of conscience seems a given to me. As you, Minister James Dixon notes, conscience is the part of us we trust to guide us right, to guide us to, as Ert Russell said, do right. As Unitarian Universalists, we trust the individual conscience above all other authority in not only determining religious truth, but in all walks of life. Dixon goes on to say that the conscience could be called the voice of reason, the voice of God. That still small voice, it can be heard or be hard to hear if we fill our lives with too much noise, but it's there. And most of us realize that we need not only listen to our own still small voice, but to the still small voices of others as well. And perhaps that's where the democratic process comes in. But isn't the democratic process just a man-made form of governance? Maybe I should say people-made, but yes, man-made form of governance. Should it be a spiritual principle? As I began to explore and read more about democracy, I became more ambivalent. The ongoing world events did not help me in my quest either. Something has definitely gone wrong here. And what about the whole process of elections? This electoral college thing has messed us up royally, more than once in our recent history. The damage from having Trump in office for 4 years will be felt for decades to come. And political campaigns haven't been very appealing to me. So much of it depends on money. And yet I do share my money with political campaigns because that's how it works. Isn't this a very flawed way of determining our leaders? Listen to what others, past and present, have to say about this form of government. Winston Churchill once said, "Democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others that have been tried." SAS Agnes Repplier says, "Democracy forever teases us with the contrast between its ideals and its realities, between its heroic possibilities and its sorry achievements." Newspaper editor and social critic M.L. Mitchell said, "Democracy is only a dream. It should be put in the same category as Arcadia, Santa Claus, and heaven." Mitch can also remark, "Democracy is a pathetic belief in the collective wisdom of individual ignorance." But then economic philosopher and writer Stuart Chase said, "Democracy, as has been said of Christianity, has never really been tried." And Thomas Jefferson said, "A democracy is nothing more," and this is Thomas Jefferson said, "a democracy is nothing more than mob rule, where 51% of the people may take away the rights of the other 49. And what about the rights of the other 49%? Don't they matter? Perhaps that's possible that our forefathers quickly add the Bill of Rights to the Constitution. Some of those same forefathers were Unitarians or Universalists who had developed a faith in the authority of individuals through the democratic process in their churches. Alice Blair Wesley, and I refer to Wesley later on, I'm talking about Alice Blair Wesley, not John this time, provides the following account of our ancestors. She's a Unitarian Universalist historian. She says, this is her account. Our Puritan ancestors left England for New England, not because they disagreed with the Church of England or other Protestants in Europe over theology or anthropology, that is, over the nature of God or of humankind. They left because they disagreed over the theology of organization in the spirit of mutual love over who should have the authority and why in churches rooted in that spirit of love. 200 years later, in the early 1800s, when the Unitarians separated from the more conservative churches of the Standing Order, it was because they did disagree on the nature of God and humanity. But we unanimously kept and have kept to this day the congregational polity that was set by our 17th century ancestors for the same theological reason. Covenantal polity is rooted in the spirit of mutual love. Wesley's words show how important congregational polity, rooted in the democratic process, was for our UU ancestors and is still today. Here at UUFS, you elect the board and approve the budget and other major decisions. All members' votes count the same, regardless of how much money they pledge or how many friends they may have in high places. Not that there are people in high places at UU. But do we need a Bill of Rights to make sure the majority listens to the concerns of the minority? Hopefully we do affirm, since we do affirm the inherent worthy and dignity of all, we will heed the voices of all. For example, we have continued to use Zoom because a minority of our folks are still unable to be here for services. Our board usually can come to some agreement on these things. Usually, we can talk about it enough that we can come to some agreement. If the board members do disagree, they do follow a democratic process of voting to determine their actions. We may not always make the best choices, but we have a democratic system, as messy as it may be, and it can be messy. Molly Irvin said, the thing about democracy, beloveds, is not that it is a neat, orderly, or quiet kind of thing. It requires a certain relish for confusion. Here's a UU joke I found out about congregational democracy in action. Once upon a time, the theistic minister in one of our older New England churches was arguing with the church board. Now, I guess we really have sort of a republic here too, in that the whole congregation makes some big decisions, but then they elect a board to make the ones all through the year. Well, this church board was arguing with the minister. The minister wanted to take a particular course of action, but the board was dead set against it. Finally, his exasperation, the minister said, look, it isn't just me who wants it this way. This is what God wants. Skeptical board members were unconvinced. So the minister began praying for a sign from God. Immediately, a lightning bolt struck the room and incinerated all the chairs except for the one the minister sat in, and no one was harmed. Certainly now his wishes would be followed. The minister said, well, the board president answered, you still lose 9-2. I guess the minister and God had one vote each. Now, on our board, I'm ex officio, and I have no vote, and I suppose God doesn't either. Some have suggested that the reason the UU democracy principle is linked to the right of conscience is because of the problems that may result from majority rule. So we got that still small voice, that conscience telling us not to go there. We constantly have to be listening to that still small voice, the voice of reason. Some may say the voice of God, so that we can ameliorate the problems that arise from majority rule. If democracy is to have any meaning as a spiritual principle, then we have to think of it more as in a spiritual way, not just a method of governance. Well, that's tough for me. Sometimes I need some inspiration. Often when I need inspiration, I turn to something or someone that inspires me. Now, there's a man that's been very inspirational to me for all of my adult life. Perhaps because of my previous career in education, I've always admired John Dewey, his teachings, especially regarding education. But I discovered another one of his works when I was in seminary. When Dewey was approaching 80, he wrote a document titled Creative Democracy, the Task Before Us. I don't think I've read that document before. And like many of Dewey's other works, it seemed so relevant, even though it was written in 1939. I normally don't like to quote heavily from one person during the sermon, so I hope you forgive me this time, because I think what Dewey has to say, or had to say back in 1939, is still very important for us today. After sharing some about the beginnings of our nation, including the open frontier and the vast physical resources, and after praising our forefathers as men extraordinarily gifted in political inventiveness, Dewey turns his attention to the present days of 1939, but I would argue could be talking about that. He says, at this present time, the frontier is moral, not physical. We don't have that physical frontier, but it's moral. Unused resources are now human rather than material. They are found in the waste of grown men and women who are without the chance to work, and in the young men and women who find doors closed where there once was opportunity. The crisis that 150 years ago called out social and political inventiveness is with us in a form which puts a heavier demand on human creativeness. At all events, this is what I mean when I say that we now have to recreate by deliberate and determined endeavor the kind of democracy when in its origin 150 years ago was largely the product of a fortunate combination of men and circumstances. He says, we have lived for a long time upon the heritage that came to us from the happy conjunction of men and events in an earlier day. The present state of the world is more than a reminder. We now have to put forth every energy for our own to prove worthy of that heritage. It is a challenge to do for the critical and complex conditions of today what the men of an earlier day did for simpler conditions. So he reminds us that yes, and I would add this to these people that say, let's go back and see what they thought back then when they wrote the Constitution. In that earlier day, that was a simpler time and a simpler situation where some things weren't very right and equal anyway, right? So we're here today and we have to rethink some of those things for today's time. Who goes on to say, if I emphasize that the task can be accomplished only by inventive effort and creative activity, it is part because the depth of this present crisis is due in considerable part to the fact that for a long period, we acted as if our democracy were something that perpetuated itself automatically, as if our ancestors had succeeded in setting up a machine that solved the problem of perpetual motion in politics. And some of those people today would say all we need to do is look back to how they thought then. That's their thinking, that it was set up that it would just be fine just to keep doing the same things. We acted as if democracy was something that took place mainly at Washington or Albany or some other state capital under the impetus of what happened when men and women went to the polls once a year or so, which is a somewhat extreme way of saying that we have the habit of thinking of democracy as a kind of political mechanism that will work as long as citizens were reasonably faithful in performing political duties. Not that they are. But Dewey says not so, Dewey says. Democracy is a way of life controlled by working faith in the possibilities of human nature. The democratic faith in human equality is belief that every human being, independent of the quantity or range of his personal endowment, has the right to equal opportunity with every other person for development of whatever gifts he has. Dewey also shares how this is connected to our desire for peace. He says, a genuine democratic faith in peace is faith in the possibility of conducting disputes, controversies, and conflicts as cooperative undertakings in which both parties learn by giving the other a chance to express itself instead of having one party conquer by forceful suppression of the other. To cooperate by giving differences a chance to show themselves of the belief that the expression of difference is not only a right of other persons, but it is a means of enriching one's own life experiences. It's inherent in the democratic personal way of life. Dewey realizes he's moved beyond politics and into morality. And he confirms this by saying, if what has been said is charged with being set up of moral commonplaces, my only reply is that it is just the point in saying them. To get rid of this habit of thinking of democracy as something institutional and external and to acquire the habit of treating it as a way of personal life is to realize that democracy is a moral ideal. Insofar as it becomes a fact, it is a moral fact. It is to realize that democracy is a reality only as it is indeed a commonplace of living, of how we live. The task of democracy is forever that of a creation of a freer and more humane experience in which we all share and to which we all contribute. So he's thinking of democracy as a moral guideline, ideal, and not some institutional practice only, political practice. Well, amen to my friend Dewey. And if that is what democracy is all about, then yes, maybe it should be one of our Unitarian Universalist principles. Walt Whitman had similar ideas. He said, did you too, oh friends, suppose democracy was only for elections, for politics, and for a party name? I say democracy is only of use there that it may pass on and come to flower and fruit in manners, and the highest form of interaction between people and their beliefs, in religion, literature, colleges, and schools, democracy in all public and private life. Now, I do not believe that John Dewey and Walt Whitman thought we should not pay attention to that technical procedure which democracy implies, and that is voting. Some say that method of decision making is outdated, and that we should work, especially in our organizations and institutions, to come to consensus rather than vote. However, using consensus techniques are also problematic, and we can discuss this further after the service if you're interested. In any case, we're not going to be able to go to the polls and come to consensus in November or October for those of us who are going to vote early. But we will be able to go and participate in a process, as flawed though it may be, a process that represents the democratic spirit acknowledged in our fifth principle. So I will be there, and not only will I be there at that voting place, or maybe I'll do the absentee. I did that when we were in the middle of the pandemic, but last time I went to early voted, and there weren't that many people there, but I'll be there one way or the other. And not only will I be there, and I probably will go early vote, I shall take my religion with me to the ballot box. Take my religion with me. You may say, whoa, Jane, don't you know that politics and religion don't mix? And aren't we constantly criticizing folks on the right for bringing their religion into political discourse? Well, if you follow my actions recently, like when I was at the courthouse last week, you will see that I'm taking my religion with me, and I'm speaking out on what some deem as political issues. And I'll take it to the ballot box with me too. And if indeed your religion is what binds you to that which you believe is ultimate and sacred, then it's not something you just put aside very easily. It's who you are. So I will select the candidates and the issues on the values that I hold high. And many of those are our Unitarian Universalist values. You know what else I think I'll do? I think I may just wear my UU Side with Love t-shirt to the polls. Might spark some interesting conversations while I wait. I know you can't wear a one-part candidate, but I think you could probably get by wearing a Side with Love t-shirt. We'll see. I think you can. This is probably the most important midterm election I've voted in. And I'm only 72, so I've voted in a lot of them. But we are in such a crisis now with our democracy that I think it is critical that we show up. We must go. We must encourage others to go. We must listen to that voice of conscience. Now, I guess since I threw the question out there, I need to go back to that question that I've chosen for the title of this sermon. Can we trust our democracy to work? If we think of it as a spiritual principle, as Dewey did, then it must. If we think of it as a technological tool, which it is as well, then it could still work. If democracy is a tool, or let's say it's a vehicle, the people fuel it and the people drive it. It seems that my generation has driven it into a ditch. I stood up there last Saturday at that rally for Roe and heard all those young people speaking with such passion. And then it came my turn to speak. And I must share with y'all that I felt a little bit of a sense of shame that we had left them in this situation. Now, some people say shame's not good for you. I think a little bit of shame's all right. It can motivate you. A little bit can motivate you. Because I thought, I'm sorry that we have left you young people. A lot of them were just like 18, 19, 20 years old in this situation. But I also tell myself, but we're not dead yet. And we're gonna hang in there and help you with this, with like this and other things. We'll all have to dig that vehicle out. We've driven a ditch, we'll dig it out, we'll clean it up, we'll make it work. But whether we are among those who've suffered lives of privilege or those who've suffered great oppression, either way, we all must at least strive to do as Langston Hughes encouraged his readers to do in the poem we heard earlier entitled, Let America Be America Again. In closing, I'll repeat that last couple of verses. He said, sure, call me any ugly name you choose. The steel of freedom does not sting from those who live like leeches on the people's lives. We must take back our land again. America. Oh, yes, I say it plain. America never was America to me. And yet I swear this oath, America will be. Out of the rack and ruin of our gangster death, the rape and rot of graft, self and lives, we, the people, must redeem the land, the mines, the plants, the rivers, the mountains, and the endless plain. All the stretch of these great green states, and make America again.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, of purple mountain majesty, that birth that beauty
Yeah.